Halloween is just around the corner, but the horror of overcoming the wide receiver position due to injuries makes fantasy managers scared. Let's be honest, there's been more tricking than there's been treating as far as wide receivers have been concerned. It's becoming a fantasy Frankenstein just to put out a weekly lineup. And just as expected, Cooper Kupp looks like he's going to be making his return this week. However, we happen to lose Brandon Ayuk with that knee injury, Deebo Samuel with that pneumonia, the fluid on his lungs, DK Metcalf, Juju Smith-Schuster, and then we had the Monday Night Massacre in which we saw Mike Evans go down with that hamstring injury and Chris Godwin with that left leg injury. This has not been good for fantasy people, but luckily, every team in the NFL, they are active here in week number 8. We have reinforcements on the way here amongst the ranks. So with that all being said, here are your RotoBaller Week 8 starts and sits at the wide receiver position, starting with the aforementioned Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams as they take on the Minnesota Vikings. I usually do not feature starts from the Thursday Night Football game, but I'll make an exception this week with the return of Cooper Kupp. Kupp has been the subject of trade rumors, but those are simply trade rumors. Kupp probably could have played on Sunday, both 2 games in 5 days. Los Angeles, they decided to play it safe, which is probably a good thing considering everything that's been happening at the position in the last couple weeks. Now, Kupp, he was targeted 27 times in the 2 games that he played this season, including 21 times in week number 1 when he had 14 receptions and 110 yards. While the sample size is limited due to Kupp missing most of the season due to injury, when we last saw him in action, he commanded an astonishing 52% first read target share. When a receiver receives that high of a first read target share, it bodes well for their fantasy outlook. It's even better when the same receiver faces a defense that allows a league-high 44.49 fantasy points per game. When that team happens to be the Minnesota Vikings, who have permitted 1,218 receiving yards to receivers, and just last week 112 more yards on 8 receptions to Amon-Ra St. Brown, that is the final gem in that infinity gauntlet. The second wide receiver I'm firing up this week is Jaden Reed of the Green Bay Packers, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Just when you think you've got this Packers pass-catching pecking order all figured out, they decide to play Nicky Nine-Door on you and take off. Last week against the Texans, Jaden Reed caught just 2 of 4 targets, while it was Romeo Doubs who was targeted on 10 occasions. Tucker Kraft, Dontavian Wicks, Josh Jacobs, they were all recipients of receiving touchdowns, not Jaden Reed. The Jacksonville Jaguars, they have allowed 1,240 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers, leading to the 4th highest fantasy total surrendered, 40.59 per game. After a disappointing week in which Reed caught just 2 passes for 10 yards, fantasy managers, they should anticipate a nice bounce-back performance here in week number 8. The numbers are somewhat deceiving considering Reed dropped what would have been a 43-yard completion that would have moved his fantasy production line from 3 fantasy points to 8.3 in PPR formats. Even after a down week, Reed still has 452 receiving yards on the season on 29 receptions, which puts him inside the top 15. The cream always rises to the top. Ooh, yeah! So look for Reed to rise again this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. If Reed can't bounce back this week, then we have real reason to be concerned. If we pull the numbers from week 1 and kind of toss them out to the side, and I know that's a very dangerous thing that we could be doing, Reed is averaging just 2.01 yards per route run, that's 22nd. 20.5% targets per route run rate, that's 37th. 7.1% first down route run rate, there is 43rd amongst 83 qualified receivers. I guess even cream can go bad from time to time. The third wide receiver I feel good about this week is Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. While Bijan Robinson has been getting all the attention over the last 2 weeks, Drake London has remained a very quiet assassin when it comes to fantasy football. He's like a fantasy football ninja out there. London has seen at least 7 targets and caught at least 6 passes in each of the last 5 contests, while finishing with 63 or more yards in each of those games since week number 2. London has also recorded 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games and has moved into the top 3 amongst fantasy wide receivers with 123.1 fantasy points on the season, thanks to 17 or more fantasy points in 5 of those last 6 outings. It also helps that London has had a target share greater than 22% in every game this season except for that week 1 disaster against the Steelers. With a first read target share around 37% and producing more than any other receiver in recent weeks, look for that trend to continue against the Buccaneers team that has been allowing over 38 fantasy points per game this season, the 5th most. As for those week 8 busts, Which of these wide receivers is the candy corn of fantasy? Well, how about Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals as they take on the Miami Dolphins? I simply cannot trust this Cardinals passing game anymore. They're either inadequate or play well enough to let us forget about how bad they actually are, only to remind us a week later that we foolishly put our fantasy faith back into them. This weekend, Marvin Harrison Jr. will, in all likelihood, draw Jalen Ramsey. Miami has been as difficult as it gets on opposing wide receivers in fantasy, limiting them to a league worst 22.67 fantasy points per game. Miami is allowing just 154 passing yards per game this season and has been better over the last 3 weeks, allowing just 126.3 per. Struggling offense against one of the most formidable fantasy defenses against quarterbacks and receivers, there's enough reason for me to fade Harrison this week. Another wide receiver that I'm fading this week is New Orleans Saints wideout Chris Olave against the Los Angeles Chargers. Chris Olave still has yet to clear the NFL's concussion protocol at the time of this recording. However, whether he plays for the Saints on Sunday or not, he should not be in your fantasy lineups. Derek Carr, he's once again going to be absent due to an injury. Rashid Shaheed's absence will also be felt throughout the season as there will be no other wide receiver to add balance to the Saints passing game. New Orleans offensive line, they're reeling as well, making life difficult for Spencer Rattler. If Olave somehow does return to action this week, he should see plenty of Christian Fulton and Cam Hart, who have helped this Chargers defensive unit limit fantasy production at the position to under 27 fantasy points per game, which happens to be the 5th best mark in the league. And the final wide receiver I'm sitting this week, it's Malik Nabers of the New York Giants against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is one of those temper your expectations kind of inclusions in this week's list. Pittsburgh did, after all, limit Devontae Adams to just 3 catches and 30 yards, while also containing Garrett Wilson to 61 yards on 5 receptions. I don't care who you are, that's impressive. Joey Porter Jr. and company have turned the Steelers into a top 10 most difficult matchup. They allow just 29.33 fantasy points per game and have yielded just 4 touchdowns and 1,029 yards receiving to the position in 7 contests. Porter and Malik Nabers are going to be must-watch television. Not only are they rising superstars, but they already rank amongst the elite at their respective positions. Post-game, Nabers, he told reporters, he told onlookers to watch the tape. He was open, and that was the case. I mean, I went back, I watched the tape, yes, he was open. However, Daniel Jones, it's not going to matter this week because he has to deal with TJ Watt, who's going to play a significant role in this game. Teams, they've started to figure out how you defend TJ Watt somewhat, and guess what? It still doesn't work. This is going to leave Cameron Hayward, Alex Highsmith to hunt down the quarterback one-on-one, and Jones is not going to win those things very often, and he sure as heck ain't going to locate Nabers once again this week. But if you're looking to locate all the finest fantasy football news and analysis, head over to RotoBaller.com or slide into the RotoBaller Discord channel where you'll find me 24/7. See you next time.